Hello everyone, this is Duaa, a student of the Department of English Language and Literatures of University of Bahrain. Welcome at Advanced Grammar Series. In this video, I'm going to explain the passive verbs. There are two types of verbs, verbs with and without objects, and verbs with two objects. I will start explaining the verbs with and without objects first. Rule number 1 is, we create passive forms verbs which can have objects, transitive verbs. And transitive verbs are verbs that accepts one or more objects. For example, he repairs his own car. His own car was repaired. Tom painted a picture of Mary's dog. A picture of Mary's dog was painted. Rule number 2 is, we do not create passive form verbs which don't have objects, or we can call them intransitive verbs which they do not allow a direct object. For example, the train finally arrived, and we can't say the train was finally arrived. I hope that happens. Arrived and happens are intransitive verbs which do not accept objects. Rule number 3 is, we usually create passives from verbs which describe actions. For example, Tom scored the first goal of the game. And in the passive, the first goal of the game was scored by Tom. Rule number 4 is, not with stage verbs. For example, I believe this is the case with energy. These three parts belong strictly to Eurasia, and we can't say these three parts were belong to Eurasia. Rule number 5 is, there are a few verbs that we usually use in the passive, like married and born. And here in the example, he had started the clinic shortly after they were married, so his dream was barely being realized. Here, the word married being in the passive form. Rule number 6 is, we create passives from transitive phrasal verbs, like, we locked on the television. The television was locked on. Rule number 7 is, we don't create the passive form from intransitive verbs. For example, the people came over from Norway for the festival, and we can't say and transfer it to the passive. For example, we can't say the people came over. And now I'm going to explain verbs with two objects. Verbs with two objects. Rules number 8 and 9. We can create two passive structures when we use those verbs which can have an indirect object, like here in the example, my parents, and a direct object, letter. Number 8. I wrote my parents a letter at home. In the passive, my parents were written a letter. The indirect object here is my parents, and letter is a direct object. Number 9. I wrote a letter to my parents at home. In the passive, a letter was written to my parents at home. Here in the same, letter is a direct object and my parents are indirect object. There are other verbs like this include give, hand, lend, pass, sell, send, show, teach, throw, and award. Rule number 10 is, the passive structure we choose depends on which person or thing we want to talk about. For example, they taught us American English in schools. In the passive, American English is taught in schools. Or, we were taught American English in schools. And this depends on which person or thing we want to talk about. Rule number 11 is, In the passive, we put the indirect object as subject or after preposition to, not after the verb. For example, she handed me a pad and pencil. And when we transfer it to passive, I was handed a pad and pencil. Or we can say, a pad and pencil were handed to me. And here we put the subject after the preposition to. Rule number 12 is, when a verb with two objects is used in only one active structure, we can only create one passive. For example, the police fined her for driving through a red light. And we can't say the police fined to her for driving through a red car. While we can say she was fined for driving through a red car. Rule number 13 is, if we can't put the indirect after the active verb, we can't use it as subject of the passive. For example, he explained the situation to us. In the passive, the situation was explained to us, and we can't say we were explained the situation, or we can't say he was explained the situation. And there are other verbs used like this include demonstrate, describe, mention, present, report, and suggest. The last rule at this type verbs with two objects is, we can use a direct object as subject of a passive, but not another noun that classifies it. For example, we must consider the facts. In the passive, the facts must be considered. They elected him chairman. In the passive, he was elected chairman, and we can't say chairman was elected him because the meaning is different. And in the end, I would thank you for paying attention and hopefully you enjoy the lesson.